Hi, my name is Kimberly Jacobs. I am the founder and creator for Lessons in a Bubble. I'm a special education teacher in California, and I wanted to talk to you today about the present levels pages in your IEP. So, we're going to talk about what the category is, what they're actually asking you, and some example sentences that you could type in that will stand up to any advocate you might meet. So I'm going to share now the SACE system. This is the one that my district uses. I didn't want to go in and edit an actual student, so I found a Word document of the exact same thing. So it would normally auto-populate the name, the date of birth, the IEP, and we're going to start with strengths, preferences, and interests. When we're typing in here, we want to mention what is the student best at, what are they good at, what do they prefer, and do they have hobbies and interests? When I'm working with a psychologist on an initial, she usually fills this in because she talks to the students a long time about their hobbies, their interests, their fears, what they like about school, what they don't. As a case manager, I'm always going to mention what subject they're best at or what kind of activity they're best at in school. Things they're good at, like they have good attendance, they're a good friend, they're a good teacher helper. And what things do they prefer or their interests? Just kind of giving insight to the teachers attending this meeting, something about the student they may not know. I also will put in things like how they prefer to learn. So prefers group projects and projects. You might have another student who prefers to work alone. Whichever case it is, this is the place you're going to type it. When I'm preparing a draft IEP, I don't ever type anything into the parent input or concerns unless they've contacted me a couple weeks prior to the IEP or when they get the invitation. I will at this point in the meeting, and this comes pretty quickly the way I set mine up. This point in the meeting, I'll ask them if they have any input that they want me to document, if they have any questions that they want me to address during the meeting. I always have a paper ready to write that down. So if they bring up a concern or a question that isn't already answered in the draft IEP, I write it down to make sure I circle back to that before we conclude our meeting. So this part I don't fill in unless I've done a survey to parents or talked with them most recently. So in California, we have the Smarter Balance tests. Because of COVID, recently we don't have the sub skills, but we do have scores for last year on the overall standard, met standard, nearly met or not met. Remember, the students don't take these tests at the younger grades, so that's when it would be not applicable. The year of COVID, we had students moving in from other districts that didn't attempt it at all, so that they were also not applicable. But as of now, everybody's back on track and they do have some test scores. Minus one student out of my 29 whose parents excused them from the test. They signed the waiver. So we're going to have those test scores. I find them in my CUME online management system. Ours is called Aries, but in there I have access to all of their electronic records. You could go to the CUME file, or you might have to reach out to a secretary if you don't have permissions to look into that area of the electronic CUME. But we're going to want to make sure to update those for the last year. The California alternate assessment is given to students who are performing well below grade level and may not be able to participate in the test in any meaningful manner, and I would fill that in there. Our English language learners will get LPAC scores, and they've actually changed that, but we're going to find out what is their language proficiency if they're a multilingual learner. So students who have one or two languages prior to coming to school, we're going to make sure that they're making progress in language arts, and I'm going to write the score levels in there. And again, I would find that in my electronic CUME file. If you don't have access, you might also have a site coordinator for assessment of English language learners. And so you'd seek them out. They would be able to give you the latest scores. So the first one, physical education and testing, that's it. Did they participate in the last physical fitness test? There's a presidential standard. So we would write what their scores were on that. Depending on the PE teacher, I get a pass fail or I get some actual data. Other assessment data is where I type in current grades. So whatever their grades are about 72 hours prior to the meeting, I'll type that in. If I'm working ahead, it might be up to a week, 2 weeks ahead of time, but I'm going to go ahead and type in one of their current scores under other assessment data. We have other tracking data that teachers use in our district. There's a FastBridge test. It's kind of an online reading assessment and math assessment. I could include those scores, but many of my students have processing delays, and so they don't participate in them because the time can't be extended. But they just want to know about any other assessment data that's going on outside the IEP. The hearing and vision dates for pass and fail. So you're going to want to know what day they were evaluated and did they pass and fail. And then the other box, that's what you're going to check if they passed because they were wearing glasses. And that'll usually be noted, again, in your electronic CUME or in their paper CUME file. But this is where we're going to note to everybody on the team that they have glasses or they do not have glasses, if they have a hearing problem and any kind of hearing aids. So pre-academic and academic functioning skills, there's where I put the results from my standardized testing. I currently use the Woodcock-Johnson 4. So I type in their scores for broad reading, broad writing, and broad math, and then the sub-scores that in California could qualify you for an IEP, being passage comprehension, word attack, reading. For math, there's calculation and applied problems. And for writing, there's sentences and spelling. For communication development, I'm going to go ahead and type in here for students that are not receiving speech and communication services. Teachers sometimes are confused about what to type in there. So I would write student, this is for a student who doesn't have services because there is no concern. Student speaks incomplete sentences, is able to ask for help when needed. So that is documenting that we're not concerned about their language, their verbal language, and everything that we've witnessed is normal, and that they can ask for help so they aren't delayed in that manner. If you saw stuttering or anything else, this is where you would note it and maybe seek further evaluation and intervention. And then I would add the words, no concerns at this time. I read these sentences to parents, so if they did not bring up a prior concern, but this triggers them to remember, oh, the other day he was stuttering. But I'm going to go ahead and type no concerns at this time and make sure I say that to parents to get their agreement. So gross and fine motor skills, this is where I'm going to talk about their muscle development. So participates in general education, PE with no concern. Want to make sure you check with the PE teacher that is true. They might have a health concern, or I know we had a PE teacher that talked about the student's gait was off and something might be wrong with their foot. So we had the nurse check that out. But if they're participating in PE and not needing special help, we're going to write that they're participating with no concern. And then for fine motor, writing is typical for age, sex. Here can be messy when rushing. So I went ahead and put that they're typical. We don't have a concern about it, but then noted sometimes the writing might be messy. Teachers or parents could bring a sample to the meeting to show that they were concerned. But if you have a sample that when they're taking their time and they know it's important, they can do better. That's really what this is about, is can they do better, not do they never rush and it looks messy. And then we're going to add again, no concern. I probably don't capitalize that. Social, emotional, and behavior. This is where we're going to check that the student is feeling okay about themselves in school and getting along. So for social, emotional, we could put, and I'll write student here. You could write the child's name. Student appears happy, participates in groups, has friends, no concerns. As we get more and more students that are struggling with autism, we get more and more that maybe don't have friends. and don't want to participate in groups, but when you have no concerns, that's what you're going to write. Vocational. Quite often I'll talk to teachers that are new to special education and they think, oh, they're not doing a job, so I don't need to fill in vocational. I'll put NA. Actually, everything does apply. So you don't want to leave any of these blank. So vocational things, so if I'm imagining a sixth grade student, vocational things that they would be responsible for comes prepared to class, follows school schedule independently, has no missing assignments, or you could say few. So those are, it's kind of their job right now to be in school. So we're going to document how they're doing at being in school. So adaptive and daily living skills. I don't have anybody on my caseload right now that needs support with daily kind of hygiene and self-care. So student cares for personal needs independent at school. And then this is where I ask the parents if they have any chores or participate in family responsibilities at home. And I would type that in. So if mom said yes, he has chores, but he has to be reminded, I would just type that. Has routine chores, does need reminders. And then health, this is where if they have any kind of health condition that's been reported to school, I will document it. I'm going to type in meds with a question mark just so we can stop here a second. If they are on medication for anything, you're going to want to put it in there. You can get the name of the medication and the dosage. That really does help if he ever moves, if something happens. But we're always going to ask about medication. But here is where I would note good attendance, good general health. No concerns at this time. And then for the student to receive educational benefit, this is on my present levels page. It's going to be somewhere in your IEP. I don't know if it'll be on present levels, but what benefit and goals will need to be addressed for this student to make for success in school. So that's pretty much how to do your present levels. Sample sentences that you can type in. Just remember, you don't want to leave anything in the present levels blank, even if someone else tells you, oh, that doesn't really apply because we teach this grade or this or that. Everything applies. There's a reason that those questions are there, and that's kind of what they're asking, and you just want to be clear and succinct in what you're telling them to do. So thank you for joining, and that's how to do present levels in an IEP if you're not sure what to write.